I wasn't sure what to think at first, but I've got to be honest with you, Peacock's Twisted Metal grew on me before the end, and I was hooked. I'm Troy from Marks on TV, and today I'm giving my honest review of Twisted Metal. Now, on with the story. If you don't want spoilers, you definitely want to avoid this review, and strap yourself in, folks, because this is going to be a long, bumpy ride. Also, I'll be pointing out some game references along the way and how they compare to the show. We start off with the show's protagonist, John Doe, driving his car, Evelyn. He explains that the power grid failed, the world collapsed, the cultural elites walled themselves off inside of big cities while the less fortunate had to fend for themselves outside of the walls. John is what's known as a milkman, who makes deliveries between cities just to give himself something to do in the apocalypse and to make a living. If you've played the games, John Doe was in Twisted Metal 2 and Black. Like the game, this John Doe has amnesia and doesn't remember who he is. He's only got a picture of his family that was half burned in a fire, so he can't even see their faces. Past that, this character's backstory is pretty different from the games. John drops off a package one day to New San Francisco, where the city's leader, Raven, tells him that he needs to pick up a package from New Chicago, bring it back within 9 days, ask no questions whatsoever, and then he'll be allowed to stay in the city. John initially declines until Raven manipulates him and convinces him to do it. Raven was also a character from Twisted Metal Black, but this character seems quite a bit different with only some similarities. In Twisted Metal Black, Raven goes crazy after two men start bullying her and her friend Kelly at a dock and end up throwing Kelly in the water, causing her to drown, and then the two men take off. Raven and Kelly are witches, so Raven's revenge was to use voodoo dolls to kill the two men who killed Kelly. In the show, Raven does wear all black and has a pentagram necklace. We even see her sewing what looks to be voodoo dolls at one point, so I feel like she's about as much like her in-game character as Agent Stone is. We'll get to him. On the road, John eventually runs into Quiet, whose brother Loud was forced to end himself by Agent Stone. Quiet and Loud are original characters for the show. Stone's character has been changed quite a bit from the Twisted Metal Black game. He was actually a good person in that game, but when he was a part of a SWAT team, he missed a crucial shot, leading to the death of a child, and it drove him crazy. They somewhat kept that storyline in the show, as he's a rent-a-cop who was asked to clear looters out from a restaurant after the fall. He becomes angry with them and opens fire, accidentally shooting a child hidden under a table. Like the game, he kept the child's bloody teddy bear as a reminder of what he did. Back to Quiet and John. He allows Quiet to tag along. They have to pass through Las Vegas and are captured by Sweet Tooth, who forces the duo to have dinner and a show as he performs a one-man play for them. They're honest about how boring the show was, and Sweet Tooth appreciates their honesty, oddly enough, so he and his best friend Harold, the Lunch Sack, take their show on the road. The Harold Lunch Sack is a reference to the very first Twisted Metal game, where when Sweet Tooth wins and gets whatever wish he desires, he says he wants his best friend back. It turns out to be a lunch sack named Harold, so they kept that. They also kept in the fact that Sweet Tooth's real name is Marcus Kane, and his father was a taxicab driver. But in the show, he was said to be arrested, and then full custody of Marcus went to his mom and stepdad. They changed the story to make him a child actor who was upset when he got upstaged by his co-star Dog. So he takes knitting needles and stabs the dog to death while on set.
I asked my dog this morning how his week's been going, and he said rough.
This leads to Marcus being nicknamed Needles Kane, like in the game, and being sent to the infamous Blackfield Asylum. When the fall happened, he escaped, tracked down his mom and stepfather, locked them in his cell, and we later see that they appear to have starved to death. John and Quiet go on a long journey across the continental United States and eventually get picked up by a convoy of semi-trucks where we meet Granny Dread and Miranda Watts. Granny Dread is from Twisted Metal 3, and Miranda Watts is from Twisted Metal Head On, which was supposed to be the true sequel to Twisted Metal 2. It's a long story. Either way, I won't run down how very different both of these characters are in the show from their in-game counterparts, but they're very different. Just take my word for it. They get John and Quiet to pick up some medicinal herbs from a florist, Amber Rose. She's also from Twisted Metal 3 and drove the Flower Power car, so her being a florist makes a lot of sense. John and Quiet eventually make it to grab the package in New Chicago, where they have to go into an underground creepy bunker thing to retrieve a bag. The person speaking to them and instructing them through speakers on the wall is Calypso, so we can see where things are going to go. The other thing I wanted to mention is that John and Quiet wind up at a Milkman meetup spot where they run into a bunch of characters from the games. Some are pretty accurate with no real character development, and others are, again, very drastically different from their in-game counterparts, like Mr. Slam and Bloody Mary. Mr. Slam was in Twisted Metal Head-On, and was the ghost of a guy who really looked like Milton Wadhams from Office Space.
I believe you have my stapler.
Bloody Mary is from Twisted Metal Black, and was a woman who was too crazy to ever tie down a man, so she jealously murdered her friend at her own wedding. You know, like you do. Anyway, most of these people die in a big brawl at the bar, and it's implied that one specific character somehow survives. But we'll get to that. John and Quiet end up getting abducted by the Holy Men, led by Preacher, who's a character from Twisted Metal Black. Preacher and the Holy Men literally drink Coke, no, not the soda, fornicate, and a bunch of other stuff that drastically changes the characters from the game. However, he does make reference to the game when he says that he was once possessed by a demon baby that made him kill a church full of people. This skirmish winds up with John choosing his car Evelyn over Quiet, and Quiet leaving him and thinking that he dies when Evelyn blows up. They eventually reunite when the convoy picks both John and Quiet up separately, and John tries to work things out with Quiet while they piece together their new car, Roadkill. Roadkill is a car from almost every Twisted Metal game, except for 4, and is not driven by John Doe until Twisted Metal Black. Getting back to Sweet Tooth for a bit, he ends up busting into Agent Stone's compound at one point after Stone had captured Quiet and John and was about to sentence them to death. Sweet Tooth uses his makeshift machete to mow through all of the officers and free the captors. The two recruits, Mike and Stu, who are obscure characters from Twisted Metal 2, are also there. Mike blends right into the officers, but Stu is more hesitant to kill. Sweet Tooth later takes out another compound of cops and releases those prisoners, including Stu. So, Stu and the others follow Sweet Tooth and his minions. They end up wearing clown paint at one point, referencing the gang of the Clowns in Twisted Metal Head-On. Agent Stone and his people take out Sweet Tooth's minions at one point, leaving only Mike and Stu. So now, Sweet Tooth is after Stone. Agent Stone is making friends all over the place, because he also attacked the convoy at one point, causing them to be pissed off at him as well. This all leads to a big Twisted Metal battle where everyone meets, and Stone, allegedly, meets his maker. It looks pretty bad for him, and he supposedly dies off screen, but I guess we'll have to see what happens if there's a Season 2. John and Quiet get the package back to Raven, and she says that only John can enter New San Francisco. He originally declines the offer until Quiet shoots him and says that he needs to go in without her. He tries to adjust to city life and is doing quite well until he realizes that he misses Quiet. We find out that Raven has been manipulating John Doe's surroundings and forcing others to be his friend and welcome him into the city so that he will let his guard down. The package, by the way, contained a small container of ice cream, which Raven didn't even like. When John finally says that he's taking off, Raven reveals to John that his house and family of his mom, dad, and little sister were actually right there in San Francisco before the fall, and he can learn more if he stays. He says no, so Raven instead threatens him, saying that he will be her driver in the upcoming Twisted Metal tournament held by Calypso. The winner gets whatever their heart desires, and Raven wants that prize. We end the season seeing the back of Calypso, which looks like the design from the 2012 reboot video game, making a tournament bracket. Here, we see that Bloody Mary survived. He also has pictures of series favorites, Axel and Mr. Grimm. Quiet is also seen getting pulled over at gunpoint by a gang of women in porcelain doll masks, being led by another fan favorite, Dollface. This time, she's going to be John Doe's little sister, who tells Quiet that she's looking for him. Also, after Stu turned on Sweet Tooth and shot him in the eye earlier before running him over with an SUV to save Mike, we see the murderous clown is back and dragging Stu off into the woods after attacking both him and Mike. And that's where we leave it. Backstories were changed, characters were altered, but the backstory of Twisted Metal is so strange, twisted, no pun intended, and convoluted, I'm not mad at any of that. Drivers change vehicles, designs change drastically from game to game, and there are so many different timelines and histories that it's hard to keep up with what's canon and what's not. So I really don't blame them for not keeping exactly with the games on that. As far as the vehicle designs and important character designs, like for those of Sweet Tooth, they did really well. Some people didn't like that this was made into a dark comedy instead of a straight-up dark horror like Twisted Metal Black, or even the 2012 remake, but to pretend like Twisted Metal 1, 2, and Head On didn't have a lot of dark comedy aspects to them is just disingenuous. Overall, this was a fun romp through a new reality of Twisted Metal. The third and fourth games are nowadays said to be non-canon and a completely different universe because they were made by a completely different studio. Black was a different reality. 2012 is a completely new remake, so there are tons of planes of reality for the Twisted Metal universes. This is just another one. I went in not knowing what to expect and thinking that I may not be a huge fan of this. To be honest, it took me a couple of episodes to really sink into this show all the way, but once you give in, it's pretty damn fun. Comment down below, what did you think of Twisted Metal? Did you enjoy the show or wish that it took a darker tone? Are you looking forward to a possible second season? Also, are you a fan of the games, or is this your first exposure to the world of Twisted Metal? Let me know in the comments. Also, please share this video around to everyone you know, and don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click that little bell to be notified every time we post brand new content. I've been Troy for Marks on TV, and we'll see you next time.